Yeah, pair bonding is set in a universe much like ours, but inspired by Greek mythology. So in this world, soulmates are a known reality, but the odds of meeting them are like astronomically low. But because it exists, and because it's you can bond at a single touch. It sort of alters the way that people relate to each other. For example, if you knew your soulmate was out there, would you search the world for them, or would you accept the likelihood and settle for love? So pair bonding is six of you now. Hello, you found me. Okay. So yeah, pair bonding is a metaphor for queer relationships in that sense. Because the novel looks at what happens when you fall outside of those two acceptable, attitudes to love, and what it looks like when you start building your own happiness in this very black and white world. So yeah, as I was saying, there are 3 stories within it. What we'll do throughout this is I'm going to do a little reading from each of these, and then some bonus readings if we have time as well of how of the characters meeting each other, which isn't necessarily the start of all of their sections, but it's something that's a bit fun once you know who they are a little bit more. So let's see what else I can talk to you about while my interviewee is busy linking everyone to the new video. Unless you guys have any questions in the channel right now that you would like to ask, you can just type ahead if you do. Okay, so I'll tell you about the message of the book. I'm slightly worried actually that I've hammered it home like a little too much, because I think the best way to put it is what one of the characters actually says at one point, which is love is sacred wherever you find it. That's essentially the whole message of the book. It's all these people who are, through no fault of their own, sort of expected to follow a certain path, and it's them finding a way out of that. Okay, next question. Like where Rebecca got off the bus took me back to July 2001, green smelling footpath. Okay. Yeah. So earlier in the first story of the book, Rebecca's story, she goes to an outline, which is essentially a society that tries to live outside of mainstream society. And yes, she has to get the bus there, walk through this maze of a forest for like a mile or two before she sees it. That's quite fun. Question: how long did it take you to write minus extensive editing? A long time. Okay, so I went to Bath University for my master's degree in like 2014, and the reason I chose that course is it essentially it pushes you to write a novel within the space of that year. I think you get to write about 70K or something. Oh, right. For those people that don't quite understand how words translate to pages, that's around, your average novel is somewhere between like 80 and 120K. So the fact that, I did 70 just on that novel there was quite cool. So in a sense, I think I then did, you know what, I wrote this down this morning actually because I could not remember. I think that year went from September to September, and then the book launch was in the next May. The book launch then was like an anthology of all of the students' work that went out to agents and publishers and things to see if we would get picked up. And that was in May. And by that point, I had a full draft because I wanted, if an agent asked for a manuscript, the worst thing you can say is like, no, sorry, guys, it's not ready yet. So I had a full manuscript. I don't think it was my best. It was only 80,000 words, which is, as I said, on the short end of a novel. But I did have one and that did get done. So that's a year and a half. Is it? Can I do maths? let's say it's a year and a half to actually write the first draft. And then I got my agent in May, like pretty much straight away. And we edited that book for 3 years straight, I would say, both with her and then with various editors who were interested and wanted rewrites. And that's how long it took, which is kind of depressing to say out loud. All right. Is there a character you most identify with? Sophie has just laughed at me here because yes, So the third story in the book is about Lizzie and Ruin. And I very much identify with Lizzie. I didn't realize how much actually until I took a sample chapter into a workshop, and my classmates. I'm not going to say they insulted her, but one person commented that she was a bit unlikable, and I got like weirdly offended. Um, and then that was the moment when I realized, oh, I think I might put a little bit too much of myself in her. Um, the reason why I think is she's just kind of interesting. I find her a lot more interesting than other characters. Again, probably me being an egotist there, but she's just kind of complex. And every time you see her in a scene, she's just a slightly different version of herself. I do see her as sort of actually being on the autistic spectrum. If you read her, she has very like the way she reacts to things, especially it's very interesting. And yes, she's my favorite character actually, and yeah, the one I most identify with. Right? How did you feel when you finished writing it? Which time? So the first draft of this novel, I say it was only 80K. There was okay, I'm gonna admit something really nerdy to you. So I was doing a modernism and postmodernism module at university when I wrote this, and so I had the most pretentious idea that the first time. Okay, I'll get that. So I had the pretentious idea that it would be like a story telling a story telling a story, and it would be like a circular narrative. Yeah, really nerdy. So after I wrote that, I think I felt confident in it at the time. Did I? I think I liked the separate sections, but I wasn't sure of the overall sort of shape of the work. I was clearly confident enough to be able to present it to agents, which I suppose is the important thing in the end. But I don't think I was particularly happy. After the many rewrites, I feel like each time it felt stronger, and therefore I felt happier with it. And especially this last time, I mean, the reason why I decided to publish it and do it now is because I read it and I was like, you know what, it's solid, and I felt confident and happy with that. I felt quite conflicted about the ending when you got there. Was that intended? That's interesting. Could you elaborate on that and I'll come back to you? I want to know what sort of conflicting feelings you've had, if you can verbalize them. If you can't, don't worry, I'll try and come back to you later anyway. Okay, Lindsay, you mentioned other editors wanted changes. Did you keep all of the changes, or were there some changes that you're happy to change back now that you had full control of the final product? Interesting question. So most of the comments I had from editors was that the narrative didn't feel cohesive enough, which totally makes sense because yeah, I started out with 7 different stories. That is insane, like crazy. So definitely with their advice, I completely kept all of their sort of structural changes. I did when I was editing back. Sorry, Sophie's just suggested I talk about, in quotes, the dickweed editor. Yeah, one of the editors wanted me to just trim it back down to basically the white guy story. But the entire book, I did not want to do that. So I did change some things that my agent had put in, only minor things, because honestly, these guys, they work in the industry, they know what they're talking about. So when they say, look, it'll be a lot stronger if you do this or do that, I get it. And they're totally right, as it turns out. And I did them. The only sort of things that I changed between, let's say, the draft of the novel that I ended up with about 2 years ago when I started working on it, and when I dug it out and changed it, ready to publish this year, was sort of line edit sort of things. Just because as a writer, you have a certain way of speaking, which your agent, as try as they might, when they help you edit work, they sometimes you know, it won't sound good in your head as the writer. It will be like, okay, I get what they're trying to say, but I got to make it prettier. So it was little things like that I changed, really. The majority of their advice was rock solid, and it stayed in the book. Okay, without giving too much away, the novel explores. Okay, yeah, I see. It is hard. I asked you to basically spoil the book for everyone, didn't I? Thank you. The negative impacts of bonding on people's lives. Yeah, and kind of contradicts that. Oh, I see. I struggle to feel happy for the characters. My main thought was, but what about their individual poetry? And felt a huge loss. That's a really sweet thought, actually. Yeah, how do we say this without spoiling it? I don't think it's a spoiler going in, because when you come to the readings, you'll sort of know that the third story, essentially, it builds up. So both of the first two stories are essentially about what happens when bonding goes wrong, and the third one essentially is a story of a bond. And by that point, hopefully, you know that it's not going to be quite so straightforward. So yeah, the two characters that you see from their point of view in the final story do bond eventually, and with some difficulties. And that, yeah, they're poets, and you're right. They've got very individual, different styles of poetry. I wish I could have included them, actually, because I have written like 5 for Lizzie, and Ruin, honestly, God, if you're so bored by that poetry, I did not even bother. But you know what kind of poetry is. In fact, I think you do have a glimpse of it. There's a bit where Lizzie's like, oh, I bet just wandering around thinking about like the moon goddess. And he's wandering around thinking about the moon goddess. So yeah, they do have very different styles. And when they bond, obviously, there's sort of an implication at the end that they now write together. It's interesting you felt that. I mean, you're right. It's really sad, actually. I had to cut out this debate between a searcher and a settler, where essentially one of them does argue you lose your sense of identity when you bond. Yes, and it's a legit fear. So it's perfectly reasonable that you understand that way. I'm also, by the way, very impressed that you read it that quickly. But yeah, it's perfectly fine that you're conflicted by the ending, I'd say. I don't think you're meant to walk away with particularly feeling about bonding one way or the other. I just hope that you walk away thinking about what you personally would want, and therefore what you want in this world too. Okay, what's the next question? Okay, that's it. Right, what have we got here? What came first, plot or characters? In this case, I think I knew I wanted to write what is essentially a soulmate AU pretty much straight away. What happened is I went, as I think I mentioned before, most of the novel got written at Bath University on their master's degree. And what they do before you actually start classes is they have a little sort of writer's retreat sort of thing. And they sat us all down and were essentially like, if you're thinking of bringing, a mid-written novel in here, or you've got ideas or whatever, just leave it, don't do it, start fresh. Because the problem is, if you bring in a novel that's sort of half written, it's just sort of A, it's kind of cheating in a way, and B, it's just not going to be as authentic, and your classmates won't be there to sort of help you build the journey with it, and it's not a good idea. So I abandoned what is now going to be my second book, The Tipping Point, which is about climate change, to write pair bonding. And you know what? No idea why I chose that one idea out of everything, but it was this very strong idea I had of, I want to do a really gritty, like, soulmate AU, where you see how destructive this sort of, not just the processes of like one in 612,000 people or something, to bond, but also what that means for society and how it would sort of cheapen love. So yeah, I just knew I wanted to play with that idea, and I did that first. And then the plot, no, I'm not going to say the plot stemmed from that. You're right, I think the characters stemmed from that. I definitely had Lizzie quite early on, and I had Ed, who is the protagonist of the second section, very early on, because I knew I was going to do you guys familiar with A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood? It's like it's a novel where the guy basically has depression. Really cheery, I know. But he what I love about it is the sort of glimpses he has every now and then of through the kind of fog of depression. And I very much wanted to write a character going through that. So yeah, Ed also came pretty early. Next question. How much world building takes place before writing? I actually have something interesting to show you guys. I was going through all the notes I had that I took while writing this, which is a sizable amount considering it was like 5 years ago. But in this was the very first thing that I wrote, and today I've worked out when it was. It was the 12th of October, so I was about 2 weeks into the Bar Spa course, and therefore 2 weeks into thinking about what I wanted to write. And I did this little brainstormy thing here. I don't know if you can see that. And essentially, this is how I started my world building. Here in the center, it's like alternate universe. I knew that I wanted that, and then from that, there's like lines over to social hierarchy, culture, laws. Laws was a big bit for me because I was like, if you can work out the way that society operates in a world, then I think you can definitely sort of tell a lot about how the people work too. So here it says laws, workforce, international, property, court, really quite a lot. And then, yeah, from that, I would just keep building. I'd be like, okay, so if that law exists, how does it get implemented? What are the implications for the people that don't get that sort of help or, what have you? A random world building fact. Okay, this is very random. Because in the world of pair bonding, you bond by a single touch. It's called a touch for recognition. Because of that, the whole world operates slightly differently in the way that, and actually I would hate this world, but every time you're in public, people try to touch as much as possible, which sounds horrible. But if you think about it, if you had to withstand a few strangers' touches on your hands, and it can mean that you find your soulmate, I guess maybe that's a price that a lot of people think is worth paying. So yeah, the whole world revolves a lot more around touch, and consequently, there's really random things that occur to me, like elevators in shopping malls. You know how there's sometimes like a strip in the middle, I guess for safety. I wouldn't have that. There'd be one up and one down together, so that as you are going up or down, you can hold out your hand to whoever is coming up in a gesture of recognition. Okay, I think, do we have another question? One from Lindsay. That was one of the really cool things I liked, the details like laws. Oh, thanks. It wasn't a total waste of time then to work out the gritty details of this world. Did you look up any real world laws to base yours on? Probably should have, huh? I did not. Yeah, so for those that don't know, the second story, the book, Ed, he works for something called the Pair Bond Service, which is a part of the UK government that is basically sent to officiate bonds, to regulate them, to do research. And that's obviously a very kind of bureaucratic setting. And there's a major plot within that story. How much can I say without spoilers? No, I can tell you about the boring legal bit. Right. So they introduced this new law, which is, it basically works like a student loan scheme, but for bonded pairs. So that when you meet your soulmate, if you both happen to be in the UK, good for you, I guess, is that if you earn less than however much money they set, the government would give you a grant so that you can basically get yourself sorted enough to be able to contribute to the arts and the elite and the temples and all of that nonsense, which when you read the book you will get to know very well. So that, can I count that as research? Like, I had a student loan, therefore I know how they work. I probably can't, can I? Yeah, I did a lot of research in terms of like Greek mythology and Lizzie's doctoral research. Lizzie's the main character from the third story. Her doctoral research is in the Beat generation, specifically Anne Ginsberg. Did so much research for that. But when it came to the actual laws in Ed section, nah. They were based on like my knowledge of how council officers work and how laws work, which is kind of minimal. But essentially, it's like an office sort of setting more than an actual legal setting. So I hope I got away with it. Will there be another novel set in this world? So I think I mentioned the story started out. The novel started out with about 7 stories within it. One of them I was particularly attached to. Actually, it was set in space. Why wouldn't you be attached to that, right? So I do have an odd idea that maybe if this is popular enough, if people want it, then I would release sort of other stories set in this world as a sort of short story collection. But I'm definitely not planning on having another novel set in the world. I think we've told the sort of main message that needs to be told about it. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more stories that you could set in this world, and it's very tempting sometimes for me to sit down and write them. So it's not an impossibility. Okay, I think one more question, then a reading. Yeah. How long is keeping the outliers separate sustainable? Oh, interesting. So the first story rather in the novel is Rebecca Brighton's story, and she goes to an outlier, which is basically a society raised without the knowledge of soulmates. And the reason why this is interesting is because there was this psychological sort of effect that I made up called dissonance, where if you are raised without the knowledge of soulmates and you find out otherwise, it sort of causes this sort of mental jarring in your head, and it's unsettling enough. It's sort of a depression sort of thing if you find out that you've been lied to. But if you witness a bond, then you die, which is how Rebecca's husband dies, which by the way is not a spoiler because that's literally how the book opens. you can't like at me about that. So yeah, it's outliers, although they're intended to sort of protect children from having to make that horrible choice. I think the master of the village, he describes it as when Rebecca arrives, is like seeing her just sort of wound up with tension. Like you can sense the sort of continual rejection that is not, that always reaching touch and never bonding. He can read that like tension on the body. And so that's the intention, is to raise these children without that knowledge, but it comes at the terrible cost that if one of them does find out, then they're going to have depression at the very least, and if they witness then a bond forming, then they're going to die. So is it sustainable? No. Short answer. I actually wrote, sorry. So in an old draft, I actually wrote a story where I think it's Elena, who's now a side character in the third story of this book. She goes back to Petersville after it's been dismantled, and she recalls going there as a child to some sort of a debate as to what to do with the land and sort of politics around it. And it was really sad actually, because the master of the village, who you meet in the first section, was just still there by himself, and everyone else had left. It was really sad. Kind of sad that it didn't end up in the book. But yeah, I don't think they're sustainable at all, because I think, as Lizzie says herself at some point, like, you just can't hide from the world forever, which is what the outliers were trying to do. I think it's detrimental to people's health, really. It's understandable in terms of the historical context at that time, which is in the book, so I won't go into it. But yeah, it's not sustainable at all. Okay, so I'm going to do the first reading for you, as we've just talked about Rebecca. I think the reading I actually have for you is when she goes to Petersville the first time, which would be ideal. So let me just bring this up. So this is essentially how the novel opens, is with Rebecca. On a warm, pleasant day, I was wrong about it being the introduction to Petersville. I'm sorry. This is the very literal start of the book, which I think I mentioned already, is when she finds out that her husband, who was an outlier, has witnessed a bond and therefore committed suicide. Okay. On a warm, pleasant day in 1992, Rebecca Brighton comes home to find her husband dead in the bathtub. He is floating in his own blood, naked except for the thick black bracelet on his wrist. Her first thought, strangely, is for the people in the flat below them. She imagines the retired couple sitting in front of their small television, Mrs. Mayer viciously knitting a jumper, and Mr. Mayer languidly reading Dickens, unaware of the morbid scene above them until a drop of blood obscures a word on page 72. The bath tap is still gushing water between Matthew's feet. It makes his corpse bob up and down like one of Lizzie's plastic bath toys. Rebecca wonders if his gaunt body will become so light that it will slip over the edge of the bathtub and swim towards her shoes like a wave on the shoreline. The kitchen knife he used floats halfway between them on the blood-soaked tiles. Rebecca drops in front of the toilet and heaves. The iron tang of blood assaults her nostrils, but when her eyes open once more, there is only vomit in the toilet bowl. She stands and sees a stranger in the mirror before her. A ghostly white woman with her husband's blood on her cotton trousers, an eerie sight in a familiar place. This is where her family used to navigate around each other in years of shared morning routines. Now she stands ankle deep in a red ocean. It's mid-afternoon now. She still has to pick up Lizzie from nursery. If Rebecca hadn't finished her shift early, Matthew would have spent the entire day floating here. Would the bath water be clear again in an hour's time, too? The body only has a limited amount of blood after all. Rebecca turns off the tap. She looks down at the plug hole, visible between his bobbing legs. She cannot bear to look at the wound in his chest. A wound cut with such depth and precision. No hesitation. She has been a nurse for 10 years and knows a determined suicide when she sees one. The telephone is ringing down the hall. Rebecca steps away from the bathtub, closing the door behind her. A wave of red pulses out into the corridor. She walks down the hall in her wet trousers and picks up the phone. "Hello," she says. Her voice is lifeless, like it too is floating in water. "Hi, Mrs. Bryson. It's Rob here, Matt's boss. We were at a meeting this morning and we haven't seen him since. Just thought we might be off celebrating, but..." "Celebrating? Oh, yes, excellent news. Ought to be in the papers tomorrow. The one of our own found their soulmate this afternoon. Shook hands with a client and bonded right in front of us." Bonded? Rebecca feels the word tear at her insides. Did Matthew witness it? She whispers, even though she already knows the answer. "I reckon so. We were out at lunch and..." "Rob, Mr. Henry, sir. Matthew has severe dissonance. He shouldn't have been exposed. He shouldn't have..." She pushes her fist against her mouth, trying to block the outpour that threatens to escape. "Well," Rob says jovially, "we try our hardest, but it's not like we can tell when someone's about to bond now, is it? Or stop it even?" He chuckles. "Of course," Rebecca replies. Numb. She's numb. "I realize he was an outlier, but he should be over the shock of it now, surely. We need him back at work pronto." Rebecca closes her eyes and takes her fist far enough away from her mouth to speak clearly. There are teeth marks on her knuckles. "Mr. Henry, sir, Matthew won't be returning to work. Ever. I'm so very sorry." She hangs up the phone before he can answer and looks back down the corridor to see more blood seeping under the door. Somehow she manages to call an ambulance and waits for them to take away the body. She calls the Mayers and asks them to collect Lizzie and take care of her. Later, Rebecca can hear her daughter's screams in the flat below as she scrubs the blood from the bathtub. She's going to have to explain this to her. How do you tell a three-year-old that they no longer have a father? She scrubs the bathtub, but no matter how much she bleaches it, she still sees red. Suddenly, a gentle hand brushes against hers. Rebecca jars and drops the sponge in the bathtub. It felt like a touch for recognition. How could anyone think that she would want to find her soulmate at a time like this? But it's not the first and middle fingers raised in the standard gesture, she realizes, but a tentative brush of fingers in comfort. It's Jane, one of the paramedics. She must have stayed because now she is hovering over Rebecca with a frown on her face. "You're in shock," she says, and Rebecca doesn't doubt it. Rebecca is given a sedative and falls into a fitful sleep that night, but dreams don't come, only memories. And then, of course, we follow her as she goes back and remembers the time at Petersville that resulted in that tragic death. That was heavy. Can we have some questions? Cool. I'm glad you ordered. Glad you're excited to read it. Enjoyed the Outlight stuff. Give some more about Space Story. I'll tell you more about Space Story when we're not so like emotionally devastated. You mentioned Petersville. Were you thinking of Hampshire, Wiltshire, or Cornwall, or somewhere that you just used? So yes, it's named after Petersville in St. Agnes, Cornwall. Don't know why. I was writing most of Rebecca's section in St. Agnes, so a lot of that is actually based around that area, really, and the sort of, I don't know, I was new to Cornwall, and I sort of felt a bit like Rebecca in that way, and that it's very close, sort of tight-knit community, and it took me a while to feel like I belonged here. So yeah, it's inspired a lot by Cornwall, and particularly St. Agnes. Cool. What's the next question? Favorite character? I think I've already mentioned is Lizzie. But for those who didn't listen, weren't here earlier, yeah, Lizzie is the protagonist of the, or joint protagonist of the third story, and I very much love her. How does pair bonding work? Age, sex, country? Oh, okay. Right. Time for a lesson. So, yeah, in this universe, you find your soulmate by essentially being lucky enough to touch the right person. It's called instant touch recognition, or ITR, whenever you do. And it works. No one really knows how it works. It's a bit weird. It could be literally anyone in the world. It could be any gender. And the age difference, the largest recorded age difference, I can't remember the fact is in the book any longer, but it was. Might still be there somewhere. The largest recorded age difference was 10 years. Also, fun fact, the earliest you can get tested for bonding, like if someone suspects that you've bonded, the lowest age is 7. No, it's 8. 7 or 8. Because before that, you know, the kids, how would you know? They might scream whenever you parted them, but you wouldn't reasonably be able to conduct tests with them. Sophie's asking about historical bonded pairs. Give me a second. This is why you shouldn't date a historian. Okay, historical bonded pairs. So there is actually a bit of a list in Ed's section, which is the second story in the book. It goes into a lot of the sort of science because he's a tester. He tests for bonds. So it does go a lot into the science and the history of pair bonding, including, yeah, some historical pairs. The only one, when I was writing this, the only one I knew for sure was going to be Achilles and Patroclus, because it's very real behavior. That, yeah, if your pair dies, you're going to go on a rampage, and then, you know, want to die yourself. It felt like a bonded pair to me. But there are a handful of others that honestly I just asked Sophie to name because I don't know history that well. How is the test done? Oh, okay, so there was a scene that got cut. This is a reoccurring theme, isn't it? Every time you ask me a question, I'm like, you know what, that wasn't the book. But I used to have it in one of the rewrites for one of the editors, God, one time, was they wanted Ed to be the person that tested Lizzie and Ruin. Now, obviously, that means the current order of those stories is Rebecca, Ed, Lizzie, and Ruin. But obviously, if Ed is testing Lizzie and Ruin's bond, they got switched around. Which is weird now I think about it. The only reason that worked is because there was another section after Ed that went on to like the elite sort of social hierarchy things. That's the only reason I think that worked. But when it was that way around, you had a testing scene of Ed testing Lizzie and Ruin. And essentially what it is a whole bunch of like mind tests, like how our Q tests are, like, oh, what does this random picture slot mean to you? Oh, what's the missing color in this square? Stuff like that. But you have the two pairs do it separated by a wall where they can't see each other. So clearly the only way that they could answer the same is if they use the sort of what is essentially a mind meld, let's be honest, to work out each other there and come to the same conclusion. So that's a lot how the tests are done. That was the only bit that I definitely decided for sure was a thing. But I think Ed also references in his section other little tests that they do to make sure. Does that mean not all bonds are super obvious? All bonds should be super obvious. That was another thing that happened in that little bit that got cut, is that Lizzie and Rowan have an extremely unusual case of an unrecognized bond. That's what they call it, where they deny it for a certain amount of time. And that really only happens if there is sufficient psychological cause to. Obviously not spoiling you, but there was cause to. So bonds are meant to be immediate and hard hitting. I think there's a nice bit of metaphor actually in Ed's section where they're like, love is a fire, can like consume you, can go out of control, can blow out. Bonding is lightning, like you know when you've been hit, like, and it's sudden and it will stay there. And so yeah, bonds should be super obvious. The reason I do testing is just because there's going to be enough kind of young, annoying, nauseating couples that would attempt to go in and do that. Would it be possible to fake a bond? Is that the question I'm meant to be answering? Okay. Scam money off the new scheme. So you don't see the scheme implemented long enough. I don't think that people try and scam it. But there used to be literally an entire section of the book, a whole new story, where it was about a scam for faking bonds. Because although it doesn't give you any money outright, because this society around you treats you as so much more, I know they just treat you a whole lot better in general, that a lot of people kind of want to bond as a way to get out of poverty or such. And there was still a little bit of a mention of it in Ed's section, because he mentions some research by Dr. Idris Vest, which is about how the actual brain chemistry works of a bond. And essentially there's something called an memory, which is a term I made up, but I do know where it is in the brain, which is where the activity happens when you bond. So all of the bonding scientists are like, what happens if you artificially stimulate that without instant touch recognition? Would it even know who to bond to, or would it amazingly work and you and someone on the other side of the world would then be bonded? So there was a plot in which they had discovered that a drug called Lysium, Greek mythology, stimulated that part of the brain. It didn't cause a bond as such, but it caused enough of a bond-like sensation. It activated it enough to fool the tests. But yeah, that got cut because it got a little bit too sort of thrillery, which is not really the vibe of the novel. Overarching. I think I've already answered that. Have I? Sophie's saying I haven't answered the overarching message of the book. So I'll say it again. I'll hammer it home just like the book does. So Matthew says it best in the first story of the book. It is, you know what, I could, that's the same question. One of my amazes, I can remember that quote earlier, but like 30 minutes later, I do not know it. It is, love is sacred, wherever you find it. There you go. That's the message of the book, which gets reiterated a lot because it's, oh, you'd love all the missing short stories. I might do it one day, especially so James can see the space story. What role does Greek mythology play? That's an interesting question. So I mentioned that it is inspired by Greek mythology, but I didn't tell you guys how. The reason I did it is because there's that line in Plato's Symposium about soulmates. So the line basically says, yeah, there's humans were originally one person. They had, 2 heads, 4 legs, whatever, and they got split apart by the gods, so they were cursed to find each other. Well, the Symposium makes it sound nice, but I was like, no, that's a curse, mate. So that's the story which that's the direction which the novel took, was I don't think soulmates are as romantic as the world makes it out to seem. So yeah, I started with that idea. Obviously, read the symposium. We read a Greek mythology textbook or three, and essentially then it shifted the way that the alternate universe was built. Because if you just changed our world into soulmates exist, it would be interesting. But I think it's a lot more interesting to have that idea embedded in a religion and have that religion be quite powerful within a world. So that's what it is there's a strong presence, not so much in the first book when I'm introducing even the idea really to you, but in the second and third story, definitely the third story, you see how much influence the temples have over society. Um, and I can't remember the question. Okay, I'll do a second reading in a bit. Greek mythology, yeah. So it's definitely involved in the religion. It affects the architecture in the world. It affects sort of the importance that people place onto art or the arts because it just has Greek sort of inspiration. So the second story. Gotta give me a minute. I'm not used to talking this long. Okay, the second reading is going to be Ed. So, Ed is the second story of the book. You have just met Rebecca. If you remember, that was her walking in on her dead husband. Sorry, really should have picked a happier opening there. And so, Rebecca came off worse. I'm going to answer that in a bit. Okay. So, Ed Hart is the protagonist for the second section of the story of the book. So he meets Rebecca a few years after they both have lost their husbands. Now, Ed, you know how Rebecca loses her husband. Ed loses his because he bonds to someone else, which is really tragic. I mean, obviously not for Simon, his husband. I think he's pretty happy having found his soulmate. But it leaves Ed suffering from what is called in the book spousal depression. So there's a common thing in the book called witness depression, which is when you witness a bond forming and it's so beautiful that you immediately fall into like a bit of depression of like, why don't I have this? Do I not deserve this? But as Penny so adequately puts it, who's a side character in this book, she basically says it's like that, but with the added bonus of getting dumped. So Ed is not happy, Bonnie, and this sets his introduction, which I'm about to read, is set about 5 years after his husband has bonded to someone else, and he's really still not okay, as you will see. The dream goes like this. He will turn a corner, open a door, jump from a 40-story building, and somehow always end up here. The footpath laid before him as it was that day. The vision has every detail painted in vibrancy, lucid in a way none of his other dreams are, as if he completes another brushstroke of the horizon every time he recalls the memory. Same bird song, same light breeze, the same lake at the base of the hill reflecting the hazy morning light, dew still clinging to the grass, fog lingering in the valley, like the world hung in balance, waiting. And the same hand held in his. It's a few days after solstice, and they're wrapped up warm to ward off the crisp December air. Ed can feel his own breath tickling against his chin. The warm exhale returned to him by the embrace of the university scarf around his neck. His husband wears a thick parka, the fur of the hood settling around his shoulders as he looks out towards the lake as if enchanted. They never speak in his dreams. In reality, they were talking while they walked this path, about the mundanities of life, about their future, about a dozen insignificant things that were to become even more insignificant. But in the dream, there are no words shared between them. He can feel the cold of Simon's fingertips in his palm and knows what is predetermined to happen as a shadow appears on the horizon. Please, he begs silently to Simon, to the dream. Please, not again. Simon is wearing fingerless gloves. Oh, like I am. Fun fact. A searcher tradition, but also a practical one. Maybe they just happened to be the pair he chose before they left the house that morning. Maybe he thought the grey fabric suited the blue parka. Maybe they were already in the coat pocket or lying expectantly on the top of the cabinet. Tiny, unthinking decision that would change everything. He feels Simon's hand break from his as the path narrows and the shadow approaches. That's all she ever is, the stranger, a shadow. Every other detail is picture perfect except for her. He shall always remain a stranger, no matter how many times he revisits this memory. Wants to tear Simon away, wants to scream, wants to go back to their home, back to the cabinet where Simon took those damn gloves and take them from him. But he's tried all this before, and the dream never allows him to change so much as a single detail. And so Ed watches, helpless, as the shadow reaches out and with the barest touch against his husband's fingertips, engulfs him in an impossible light. Ed waits gasping, a scream caught in his throat, sweat dripping from his skin, lungs aching as they struggle to contract and relax. He blinks in an attempt to adjust to the absence of light. He sits hunched over in his bed, disorientated, as fragments of reality start piecing themselves back together. He reaches over blindly for the towel beside his bed, and with shaking hands, numbly begins to wipe away the worst of the residue. But the memory still sticks to his skin, as uncomfortable as the sweat on his brow had been. He leans forward, focuses on his laboured breathing, and exchanges the towel for a glass of water, sipping at it until he can delude himself into thinking that he's okay. A different bed, a different house, a different time. 5 years even, and yet it still haunts him. The water, the towel, the bed sheets that never stay clean for long. A routine. 4 a.m. He wonders if it's worth going back to sleep, if he can afford not to. He sighs and hates how close it sounds to a whimper. Sometimes when he is too weak, too tired to push it away, the ghost of Simon's arms come to rest around him, soothing him back to sleep. Shh, he used to whisper when Ed had had nightmares, rubbing his hands up and down goose-pimpled arms and pressing his lips to Ed's temple. It's just a dream, he'd say. Dreams got nothing on reality. How right he was. Ed would endure that nightmare 1,000 times over, if only that's all it was. Now the cheery extract, I'm sorry. What are the next questions we have? Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. I really liked writing Ed. Actually, he's a really interesting character. Shall I address? I think I missed a question. You have for me to go back, the Ed and Rebecca relationship one? Okay, because we have just talked about Ed there. So, without going into too many spoilers, Ed at the end of his story, as I mentioned, he starts out just trying to work out what he wants now that he's ready to think about it again. And by the end of it, he has made a decision. And I think you are right to point out, Tin and Tonic, that it's not. I don't know if you're meant to really come away being happy about the decision. I think it's a compromise on both of their ends. Yeah, Ed and Rebecca do strike up. It's kind of an unconventional relationship, as it were. And yeah, there's compromise on both sides. You say you feel like Rebecca came off worse. I think you might be right. Definitely in Lizzie's section, which is the third story, that's her daughter. You see, you see Lizzie's point of view, and Lizzie's point of view is how much worse her mother is when Ed is away. Wait, that was a spoiler. Sorry. So yeah, I'm not sure. I like to think she's happy, but sometimes I wonder if she is. Sorry. Okay, why does Simon lose his love for Ed so instantly? Okay, yeah, so the way a bond works is as soon as you do touch and you do that, essentially your minds begin to sort of meld. And essentially as soon literally as soon as Simon touches this person, um, it's not just him there anymore. It's him and someone else. Now, some people, when they do bond, if they've got really strong connections that they are willing to maintain and their partner understands the sort of benefit in that, they can work to somehow include these people. Obviously not with the intensity of a bond or even that of a marriage, because the bond is so intense, but they might attempt to do that. So I've always sort of thought that implies that maybe Simon didn't view Ed as important to him as Ed viewed Simon to him, which I'm sure is a thought that actually probably kept Ed up at night too. So it's not that he loses the love. It's like when a bond is raw and forming, the instinct there is to get to know your partner in the most intimate way possible, which is literally just mind to mind. So it's not that it is cold. Sorry. So it's not that I mean, it's not that Simon loses his love for Ed. It's like he's just been consumed by like another so much more intense love that is just sort of pushed aside. That is really cold. I'm so sorry. Queer representation. I can say words. Oh boy, it's only been an hour. Okay. So Sophie just asked me, there's a lot of queer characters in the book. Pretty much everyone's bi. It's how things should be anyway. But why is it important to me that there are so many queer characters? I think I've always had this view of sort of leveling the playing field in a way. I think we've already all read a lot of similar sort of books, and I think it's so important for people to see themselves in the media that they consume, because this is how in our society we learn what is normal. Is we use media, and it's heartbreaking growing up and not seeing yourself on screen. Like, I'm still traumatized from that episode in the L Word where they tell Alice, look, don't roll your eyes. You tell Alice that she has to pick a side because she's bi. That's a horrible thing for a young person to hear. And I just I know I thought I have the opportunity to do this, so I'm going to do this. And B, also, it's just how I write. I just when I think of people, a lot of the time they're going to be queer people because I'm queer. So that's that story. Right, I think we could have another question. In the story, are the gods real, or are they a story created to explain the bond, which is a natural part of the world? Boy, let's talk about religion. Okay, so I mentioned the main religion in this world is based around the Greek gods, the ancient Greek gods. You meet a priest at one point. Even you go to a couple of temples or just one temple a lot of times because it has significance. Ruin, who is the joint protagonist of the third story, believes in this the most. No one else you meet really is a believer. I think Rebecca mentions at one point, I kind of miss just being able to blame like 100 different gods for things. Ed, completely agnostic. He compares. I think he had to go to temple gatherings with his husband, and then he compares going to biblic outings with Rebecca. It's just the same thing. It's like, I'm not interested, but I'm just supporting them. Lizzie is definitely against the temples. Her poetry is definitely well, let's see, the temples do not support it. It's mainly, I'm not going to say insulting the gods. It's they don't like it. But her foil, Ruin, he believes firmly. And it's interesting, there's no evidence at all in the book that these gods exist, but Ruin believes that they do. Ruin believes that is the reason why he found Lizzie. And I mean, it's up to you really when they're bonded as to if you interpret how you interpret their religion based from that. I think the only thing you see, shall I tell you this? yeah, well, it's a little fun fact, not a major spoiler. But when they have bonded, Lizzie finds herself praying, not actively, but it's there in her head. And then when Ruin wakes up, he's like, "Oh, it's weird. I didn't feel like I didn't feel guilty for missing my prayers," and it's because Lizzie had taken that from him. Yeah, so there's no evidence that the gods exist, but they well could. Question from Facebook: how rare is what percentage of people in the world find their bond? I should have had the statistic ready because the statistic is in the book. Ed's there's a side character in Ed's story called Penny Morgan, who's a statistician, whatever that word is. She does the maths, and she says exactly what the odds are. So you hear the odds twice. You hear it both in 1982 when Rebecca's at Petersville, and she's explaining to Master Peter the odds of bonding. Actually, if I could find that section for you, I would read it. See if I can find it real quick. It's when they're, around the war story, if you can find a war story. Okay. So you hear it then, and then also you hear it from Penny with depressing amount of accuracy in the second book. I can't remember off my head. I think it is like one in, it's definitely in hundreds of thousands. It might be more than that. And basically I worked this out by doing this maths, really boring, but I worked out how many people are in the world at any given time. So I did that calculation both for 1982 and for whenever I wrote this, 2015, I guess. I did that, and then I found a figure for how many people you're likely to meet in your lifetime, and I raised it up a little bit because of the convention in this world of intentionally searching for your pair. If you do that, then your odds are going to be way higher. But there's obviously people that don't so much. But just because of the culture of wanting to bond, of people always touching in public, sounded dirty, the odds are probably going to be more. So I think actually it's, yeah. So I did the maths, and I hope it's right, but it's really minimal. I'm talking like, yeah, I think Rebecca says when there's only, yeah, Soap hasn't had a quote, unfortunately, but it's something like there's only as many bonded pairs in Britain as there are in the farmers' quarter here, which I think is like 60 people, therefore 30 pairs. And I think there was 58 million people in the UK at that time, maybe. It's something like that. What's that? 60 people out. You found it. 56 million. I was so close. Yeah, there's probably only as many bonded pairs in Britain as there are people in the farmers' quarter here, just over 60. So good. Oh wait, it's the other way around. So 60 pairs. So it's 120 people bonded out of 56 million. And she notes there that the odds are getting slimmer just because the population is increasing. Whereas when they set up Petersville, post-war, bonds were at a boom because obviously great meeting of men. Stuff happens. And that's why they formed the villages. They were afraid it would just keep building and building. But it's not. It's still astronomically low. Okay, all the questions. Lindsay has a question. Do you think the fact that people touch others to bond, even after being in a serious relationship, causes tension in the relationship? Yes, what a fun question. So there's a term in the book that is mentioned in everything's an Ed section because that's the most expositional bit. But when he has a flashback with Simon, they sort of have a debate about what it is that they want. And Simon references a thing called waiters, which are people who are technically settled, but they're, as he puts it, off fantasizing about the one. So you're in a relationship, but you're always sort of thinking, oh, but I could find my soulmate and then leave. Which, of course, what happens to Ed. And Ed knows the brutal reality of it and doesn't even entertain the idea. But a lot of settlers, I think, even if they're not publicly going to say that they're thinking about it, are thinking about it. And yeah, would touch. I don't think the act of reaching for recognition is such a cultural thing. I'm trying to think what to compare it to here. it's more than a handshake. It's like literally it's ingrained in you since childhood. If you see someone, you do this. Like it, I don't know how that we don't have an equivalent, I guess, but it's just a cultural thing that you do. No one is like it's like no, it's not. I was like it's like in like European countries when you greet each other on kiss, but that's still no, because you do this to strangers. But it's just a cultural thing, and therefore I don't think that would cause tension in a relationship. But if you, for example, went along to a searching circle, or you intentionally went out of your way rather than just passing someone on the street, then yeah, I imagine that would cause some tension. Sophie's asking another very typical question from her. If touch is more common in this world, how does that impact disease / sexual assault? Jeez. Another cherry question. Okay. I'm going to say this again, unfortunately. There was a bit in the novel that explained that got cut. I might read it to you later, actually, so I won't go into... Well, I don't know if we'll get there because it's already 7:10, and it's like the third bonus reading. I didn't know I could talk this long. Okay, so first of all, I just really hope people have good hand hygiene. That's how you... Maybe there's more pandemics. I don't know. Judging by our current one, it seems likely. But yeah, sexual assault, it does. I will tell you, I don't think we'll get around to the reading. In an early draft of Ed, I think I mentioned it already, there was a searcher versus settler debate. And in it, one of them pulls out the filthy word of toucher. It's basically it's an insult, and it implies people... how do I describe it in the book? It's like unwanted touch, greasy palms of strangers, and those that might touch children under the guise of wanting to touch for recognition. Yeah, the definitely the culture of this much touching, it does have consequences. But yeah, that got lost just because honestly it's not suited to the current tone of the novel. It was then. That draft was a lot more adult in that way. It's not like I went into it, but the fact that I even implied that, I don't think would fit with the current tone. Sorry, there are more questions.
Why the Greeks?
Why the Greeks? Plato. It was literally... Okay, so the very seed of the novel came from a lecture in my undergrad second year. Andy Melrose. I remember where I was sitting in the theater. I remember everything. It was meant to be a lecture about Philip Pullman, Northern Lights, and it was called, for a module called Textual Intervention, Innocence to Experience. I don't know why I remember all this, but what's fun is that lecturer had a habit of not sticking to a topic. He would just go off on a tangent, and one of the tangents was him quoting Plato's Symposium, and that line about, yeah, people were once two heads, 4 legs, 4 arms, etc. And they were split apart so that they might find each other. And for some reason that just stuck with me. And then what was it, like 5 years later I did my MA, probably. It came back to me. It was just there. So it wasn't intentionally ancient Greeks. It was just the fact that the seed that grew the tree was Greek, I guess. Is there a comparison between touch for ITR versus caring touch and social media interaction versus meaningful Oh boy. Rebecca's story, the first story of our book, when she's in Petersville, she does talk a lot about the difference between touch in their world, which is without the knowledge of soulmates, versus the touch in mainstream, because touch is so desensitized. Sure. In mainstream, because you could touch like hundreds of people a day, you don't even think about it. It's meaningless. And in Petersville, she learns that it can mean so much more. I think there's even a line where she sees two young lovers hold hands, and she realizes, and they do it so tenderly that she's like, oh, it can mean so much more. And definitely when she takes Matthew's hand for the first time, you get that again. So there's definitely a difference. But whether, obviously, though, I was going to say the real world. No, in mainstream society, it's ITR first, and then once you know they're not your soulmate, it's then like you'd have to like them to touch them, like just like you would here. Yeah, that's that question, I think. Right, more questions. I'm glad you guys have so many. We wrote like 50 cards or something with questions on in case you didn't have any, but you guys are good. I was also thinking about disease because now the social norm is we must cross the street if we see a stranger. Yeah, right. Mood. Question from Facebook. Is there any significant food that comes into the story or dialogue? Oh, I love food. I love food. Okay, so fun fact, in an old draft of Ed's story, every single day he was in the cafeteria and you would get to know what he ate. There's still a little joke to this in his story. He's someone mentions that he's the cafeteria's most ardent fan. And so, yeah, the searcher settler debate I've already mentioned, that takes place over carbonara. You hear a lot about carbonara. There's a moussaka chapter. There's a fish and chip chapter. There's a taco chapter. But all of these got lost. I'm trying to think if any food remains. I think only the food in Petersville. They have like a roast at some point. Yeah, they go trout fishing. There's a hog roast near the end in Lizzie Aaron. Yeah, I'm very sorry about the lack of carbonara. Okay, are you writing your next novel yet? If yes, what kind of themes are going to explore next? Oh, hey, Steph. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks everyone for tuning in. You guys are stars. So I've actually already written the second book. I wrote it mostly before I wrote this one. So then on might miss the story of how this one came to be. I wrote this one during my MA, and we were told when we started that don't bring anything else along. By that point, I'd already written, because I started what my next novel is now going to be called The Tipping Point, which is about climate change. It's still like same found family themes, but set against the backdrop of like a climate shift. So I started writing that third year of my undergrad, which is what, 2011. Boy, obviously now a lot has changed since then, but the idea is still the same. And I wrote, when did I finish the first draft of that? I think I wrote it while I still had an agent for pair bonding, so that would put it 2016ish maybe. God, this math is too hard. I can't work that out. So it's really hard to pick a first draft actually for that, because yeah, I'd been working on it pretty much on and off since 2011. But the draft I have now, even now, I'm happy with the first, I'd say 80% of it. But the last bit, I need to write a new chapter, just because I realized there's a bit of a narrative gap in a way, and I need to perfect the ending. But other than that, it's pretty much ready to go. I'm hoping to have it out in autumn. And yeah, it's really fun. It's essentially a summary half that book, which I don't think is going to actually be a real summary, but it's a summary in my head. Men destroy the world, women save it. It's going to be good. So yeah, essentially there's three very influential brothers that get the world into ruin. It's not in space. I will tell you about the space. I'll tell you about the space story now, shall I? Sort of related, because the book I'm planning at the minute, after the Tipping Point's release, the book I'm planning, maybe starting writing, is set in space. And it's because I think I was so gutted that I had to cut the space story out of pair bonding, that I've just made it a whole novel. It's essentially the same sort of Tin and Tonic is losing it. It's the same sort of concept, same sort of character base, but a whole different theme. The theme of this one is more like humanity destroys Earth to use up all the resources to get out into space. Then they go out in space and realize that they're all alone in the universe, and maybe they shouldn't have done that. And it's again found family tropes. This is all I write, guys. I write queer people just finding their families. Okay, so those are the next 2 novels. Hopefully, I don't touch wood that the space one will go in. Any characters based on people in real life? Yeah, there's gonna be someone that's very mad when I tell them this. In fact, you know what? He already knows, and he was mad. So I was writing Lizzie and Ruins. The first, let's see, it was, again, I have my notes for when this was in time because I cannot remember. November 2013. That's a month in. So I'd been working on. I'm glad everyone likes space. Okay, I'll definitely write the space book. Right. So characters based on real life people. Right. So I had been working on pair bonding for like a month or so during the MA when I had a writing retreat with people from my undergrad. And I was working one day, and I was thinking of I knew I needed some sort of archetypal love story happening, like with a bond, you know, people that were soulmates. And I was going to base it sort of Pride and Prejudice-y. So I had Lizzie, obviously Lizzie, and then I looked across the caravan and I saw my friend Ruin, and I stole his name. And years later, I had to tell him, you know, that little thing that started out as a backstory? Yeah, it's now like a third of the book, and I made you a poet. He was not happy. So I think he's the only one that's really is stolen from real life. I mean, obviously these characters are very different, but the fact that I stole his name and the fact he's a poet, he resents me to this day. Okay. Space. Jeez, guys, chill. Fave side character. Yeah. There are a lot of fun side characters in this book. I really like writing them, actually, because they can be a lot more sort of fun and less complex than your main characters. And sometimes I'll write them specifically to sort of clash with the protagonists. So some of my favorite side characters, I'm not sure if I can pick just one dude. I really like Nate, who's like this grumpy nurse that is in the first section of the book along with Rebecca. I like him. Why do I like him? He's just mean, and I like it. I quite like the agents, the literary agents in Lizzie and Ruin's section. They're very similar. They're very sort of in your face kind of personalities. That was fun to write. Yeah, I really quite like a lot of the side characters. Do you guys have any favorites? If you do, just let me know. I'll talk about them. Hardest bit to write was definitely Rebecca's story, because by the time I wrote Rebecca's story, context. I wrote Lizzie and Ruin's section pretty much very early on. Those who were with me at Basketball that might be listening to this will remember me bringing them into class. The reason why I wrote Rebecca's story in the first place is because I knew that Lizzie's background was from an outline. And I remember at one point, I tried to have all of that exposition in that conversation she has with her mother at her house, which is still in the book. But originally, all of that exposition about what Petersville was, what an outline means, what it means cold, like for them years later, all of that was in there, and it was a mess. So I took it out. I made it a short story to preface it. It was maybe only around 8,000 words. And then I can't remember. I think it might have been my agent's first notes that said this would be really cool if you made it longer. So I made it longer, and this was definitely the hardest bit to write because I knew where I had to end up, and I knew the characters that were going to be there, and it was a really narrow path that I had to walk. I couldn't fall in love with these characters. I couldn't let them change the narrative. I knew Matthew had to end up dead. and I was just writing this whole new character in that I was falling in love with, and that I had to kill. Which I think is why the book opens on his suicide, literally just to remind myself as I was writing it, I've got to end up here. um, so yeah, that was hard, both emotionally and like literally trying to write something where you already know where it's going to end up. Jasmine, you're right. Jasmine is one of my favorite side characters. I love Jasmine. You might not have met her yet because it's fairly late in the book. It's during Ed's section. It'll make you very happy to know, Tin and Tonic. The Jasmine once had a much larger part that's not going to make you happy. It's going to make you mad. When there was a fourth section to this book, which was only like 2 drafts ago, yeah, Jasmine was more involved. I'm so sorry, but I love her so much. Those that haven't met her, her description is something like she's an Indian woman, a large Indian woman with shaved head, always wears a lab coat adorned with like little buttons and things. And she's in a non-traditional relationship, or as they call it, a non-trad, with her best friend, and they raise a kid together. And I love her. Yeah, we'll go in the shortest stories. All right. Okay, and then get to hear all about Jasmine. What did I learn while writing it? I learned to have patience. So the problem with also being a fan fiction writer is I'm in the habit of just writing stuff, putting it straight on the internet. Oh, look, it's out there. I don't have to think about it. So my instinct always is, as soon as I write something, I want to share it with people. But this book, as I told you, I started in 2014. It is now 2020. That's a long time to not have anyone to talk about this story with. I mean, I had my tutor Maggie at the university, and I had my agent Nell, and there were people I could talk to. But yeah, it's just a whole different ballpark. I have myself pub. Yikes. Okay. Are we ready for this long story? Can I do the last reading before we get into the mechanics of this? That is good question though. We'll do that. Okay, guys. So we're going to do one more plan reading, but also I do have more prepared. So we'll see what happens. Okay. So you've heard from Rebecca, the first story, when she walks in and finds her husband dead in the bathtub because he witnessed due to a bond. You have met Ed, who also lost his husband. Bit of a trend going on here, and him suffering from spousal depression. Then finally, your third story is a much happier one. Lizzie, or maybe not happy, because didn't someone say that they weren't particularly happy with the yeah. Well, I suppose comparatively as happy, is Lizzie in ruin. So Lizzie is the daughter of Rebecca, who you met in the first story, and was helped raised by Ed, which is the second story there. So by the time you meet Lizzie fully grown at age, what is she here? I think she's mid-20s, maybe early 20s. She's very young, considering she's doing a PhD. Yeah, by the time you meet her, you sort of already know her background, her personality, and hopefully when you're going into this, you realize it's going to be a bit fun. So this is her introduction. It is a warm April evening, and Elizabeth Brighton is still studying in the university library. She hunches over the desk in her woolen dress and long cardigan, hair tied back loosely with an elastic band, tapping the biro posed between her bitten fingernails against the spread of the book in a futile attempt to stay focused. She keeps circling back to the premise of her doctoral research, the line in one of Allen Ginsberg's letters. My fantasies and phrases have gotten so lovingly mixed up in yours, Jack. It's what made Lizzie realize that the Beat Generation could only be studied in relation to each other. Ginsberg is the nucleus of her research, and although his work can stand alone, it is by recognizing shared language and mythology that further meanings can be uncovered. She is checking a reference to biblical mythology when a line comes unbidden to her. Consider, you who pursue me, whether I may not, in unknown ways, be looking upon you. It is Walt Whitman, one of Ginsberg's major influences. Everything seems connected. Everything keeps circling. A vision, Yeats. Other people's words keep building in her mind until she's deafened by it. Ah! Lizzie exclaims as her mobile phone rings obnoxiously loud in the quiet library. She clamours for the phone, heart beating wildly in her chest as she searches the stacks for angry librarians. She forgot to turn her phone back to silent after the telephone interview earlier that day and doesn't want to face the wrath of the librarians for her mistake. Thankfully, this floor of the library still seems deserted. She looks down at the screen and immediately relaxes at the name it displays. Hey, Ed, she greets, cradling the phone under her chin as she continues chasing a reference on the laptop screen in front of her. Hey, he greets. I'm not disturbing you, am I? No, I was just about to head home, she lies smoothly. What's up? Home? Where are you? Rebecca's? No, no, God's no. If I visit Mum tonight, she won't let me leave again. You know how she gets. I'm just finishing up some work at uni. Then I'll head back to mine. Get some takeaway or something. Oh, he says. But it's Monday. I thought you said the results were tonight. Lizzie's fingers pause on the keyboard in front of her as she diverts her entire intention into sounding as casual as possible when she answers, Yeah, they are. But I won't hear for a while yet. Look, she says, before Ed can jump in and insist that she spend the evening in company. This must be costing you a fortune calling like this from abroad. Why don't I message you when I know the results? Ed sighs, and even through the static across the Atlantic, Lizzie recognizes it as a type of sigh that means he's weighing up if it's worth arguing with her or not. Fine, he finally acquiesces. But promise me you won't work yourself into a state over this. Whatever the result, know I'm proud of you for getting this far, okay? Lizzie shakes her head with a smile. You're such a sap, she says, because she daren't say anything serious and risk breaking her facade of indifference. I'll message you tonight, using Wi-Fi, like anyone with a shred of common sense would do when they're calling long distance. She can't help but tease. Good luck at the conference. Lizzie pockets her phone and closes her laptop. Now that Ed has reminded her of the real-life events she was trying her utmost to ignore, there is no hope in Ginsberg's voice returning to her. She packs up her books and shoulders her bag and makes her way out of the library. Ed's probably right in saying that she shouldn't be alone tonight, but she'd feel suffocated under the watchful eyes of her mother. And while Ed's still in Canada, she doesn't have much more of a choice unless she cajoles her supervisor or her agent into spending time with her, which is laughably pathetic. It's not that she wants to be in this situation either. She's always aspired to have plenty of people in her life, of having a family. It just hasn't happened. Somehow she can never seem to get people to stay. She remembers the first time she felt this way. She was at nursery school, and they were asked to draw a picture of their family and friends. Lizzie had slaved over a picture of her mother, but when she looked up, she noticed that everyone else had a whole array of people on the page. She looked back to her drawing, saw the expanse of white space, and suddenly felt the desperate need to fill it. The feeling has never left her since. Instead, she clings to her research and to her poetry, as if one day she will find enough words to fill the void. I love Lizzie. I'm sorry, she's my favorite. You guys can have opinions, but you're wrong. She's the best. I'm done. Right. What the questions do we have? Matt, you've already done that. We were going to go on to publishing and stuff. Yeah. I can talk to you about that. Lizzie seems like a really bright, determined, curious, and friendly person. Why did you have many friends? I think she just finds it hard to connect with people. It's interesting, you only really see her around people that she knows well. If you think about it, her mother, her agent, and her supervisor, they're all people that she doesn't have a choice in to socialize. They're sort of attached to her in a way, which means it's easy for her to sort of be herself around them. I think shame you don't really see her otherwise. I think you see her having a really awkward conversation with her neighbor, which might imply as to why she finds it hard. As I think I mentioned, I think she is on the spectrum. I think she just finds it hard to connect with people. Which is a shame because she is an absolutely lovely character and a lovely person. Okay, apparently I have to address both of the ridiculous questions that you guys have asked. Why no choirs in the book? It didn't come up. I'm sure the temples have them. Why no penguins? Thanks, Lou. Because I couldn't physically fit penguins into this book. Hopefully, with the tipping point, the climate change novel, I will justify the existence of penguins. If not, I've planned a way to get them into the third book, so don't panic. Also, Ruin actually seems quite switched on and ready to change and receptive to Lizzie's challenges. Yeah, they are other signs of discontent with the way things are. Financial scheme outlier. Yeah, I would love a story where the elite system slash outlier slash divide comes crashing down. I really wish I could have kept that in the book, man. You see it come down. So that was going to be the short stories collection that apparently I am releasing. you know, I think the best I could do is at the end it just sort of imply that they're going to try and bring down the system. But yeah, trying to fit that in the actual novel was insane and not that effective as well. I think there's a lot to dismantle, and it would take way more than just like 2 characters to do it. Okay, so why did I decide to self-pub? Yeah, this might be interesting to people that don't know the full story. So I will tell you the full story. Started writing this, during my master's degree, 2014, 15. I got an agent straight out of that, May 2015. Yeah, it's crazy. She came to me, which is not something that normally happens. I guess I got lucky. And I was with her for 3 years or thereabouts. So we worked on the novel together, trying to get it up to like a good enough standard to send out to editors. That was probably the majority of those. No, actually, I think we did it within a year, which looking back is insane because I will show you because it's very depressing. I could only find notes from 4 rounds of edits with her, but they're all approximately this long with notes as to what to do. 1, 2, 3. Boy, this one's dense. 4. So I did all that in a year, which is, I would not be able to do that now. I think I was just, young and full of hope. R.I.P. me, I guess. So yeah, I did all of that, and then we sent it out to people. There were about 3 editors that were interested that we went into discussions with. I rewrote the novel again for one of them. He didn't want it. I didn't really want him. And then I rewrote it for another one who I did really want. And unfortunately, we didn't agree on anything there either. So that was back in, say, 2016. The good thing that came out of that, obviously the novel, but also at the same time that they sent it out to the editors, they sent it out to TV film right department people, and it got optioned, which at least paid the bills for like a couple of months while I was rewriting all of this. And then my agent and I parted ways like last year, maybe it was longer than last year, but there was a lot of stuff going on in my life at the time, so I couldn't even think about it. We parted ways just because I sent her my second novel, The Tipping Point, and essentially she was just like, this is too sci-fi for me. Like, I could represent you, but I wouldn't represent you well, which is not something that anyone really wants. So we parted ways after that. We're still on good terms, actually. I let her know that this book is now out, that I decided to self-pub. And so yeah, we left things there. I say I had a lot going on in my life, so I didn't, honestly, while I was working at the museum in Troy, I did not work much on my writing at all. I got engrossed. And anyone that's working there knows it's extremely stressful. You come home and you don't want to do anything. So that was me for a good year or two. I didn't make much progress at all. Then what happened is I got made redundant. Yay. And I thought I was going to go open a shop because I work in retail. I'm good at open a shop. I've always kind of wanted to. So what I decided to do is I went on a free business course called Outset. It's a really good course. It's headed by a guy called Neil Jeffrey, who I mentioned because the reason why I'm self-pub, the reason why now, is because he said the worst thing that can happen with a business plan is that you leave it in a drawer for 5 years. And I sat there and I was meant to be making notes. So I was meant to be thinking about my business. And all I could think was, Pep Bonning's been sat in the drawer for 5 years. I edited it to perfection for these 8 editors. And then when it didn't get picked up by a publisher, I just put it aside, which I did in retrospect is really stupid. I suppose I was hoping that the Tim Point would get picked up, my now second book, and that I'd be able to release Pep Bonning on the back of that. But yeah, when I didn't have an agent, I didn't have a job, all I was doing was writing. And I pulled out the pair bonding, the manuscript pair bonding. I went through it and I was like, you know what, this is a decent debut novel. So I decided to self-pub it. With, I might add, a lot of help from my friend Ruin Chmethic, who has also self-pubbed in the past. He was able to help me work out how on earth to do this and how to market it, etc. Amazing. How to self-pub? Boy, don't. It's a lot of work. So, you know what? I have a list. You want to hear the list? I cannot remember it, so I'm just going to have to look at it. How to self-pub? Yeah, don't is really my advice. So yeah, I only had minimal experience. I'd done some book covers for another friend who self-pubs called Sarah Goodwin. So I knew roughly how it worked. I think I also I did put a short story up on Amazon back when like everyone was doing it. There no longer exists. Please don't look for it. So my friend Ruin, when I was talking to him about how on earth do I self-pub, said the actual uploading of the manuscript to Amazon, that takes like 30 minutes, but you've got to do so much advertising. You've got to do so much like self-promo stuff that, yeah, it eats up a lot of time. So he recommended that you set it for pre-sale, which I did, which meant that I had 3 weeks to shout about it basically and try to get as many people interested as possible. So what I did severely underestimated was the amount of time just the formatting, etc. takes. So yeah, and I had so many hurdles just in terms of the cover as well. I tried to get a new cover to work, but then our scanner broke, so I had to use one that I already had. Oh, gosh, so many things. Right, so let's look at this horrible list of things that you have to do. Advertising, pre-order, cover, summary. I'm still not happy with that summary. I feel like it makes it sound like a little too much like a romance novel, but like, you know, if I had another week in that pre-order time, I might have fixed it. Right, I had to make a new website, and that website had issues. Had to pick the price points for these things. The actual uploading of it. People then want to pay paperbacks, which I guess I should have seen coming. But Amazon are difficult, and that was difficult. Coronavirus obviously affected how I was planning on publicizing it, and I feel like I lost quite a few potential readers that way because I just couldn't put up posters because who's walking around looking at posters? Right, had to write a press release that went out. And my friend Nikki helped with that one. Thank you, Nikki. Had to find people to find ARCs, which are advanced reading copies. This is so when the book goes out, hopefully there will be some reviews on Amazon. And if you have read it and not reviewed it, please do, because it really helps encourage people to buy it. So I used a website called Booksprout, where you can upload your manuscript and get people to, like avid readers, to read it before it goes out so that they can then put a review up for you. Yeah, a lot of time just hitting up old friends and contacts to try and either buy it or promote it. And then, yeah, the actual formatting. I spent about 3 days just line editing, making sure punctuation, etc. was consistent. Because, you know, I would have read it through a billion times, but I wasn't checking to see, you know, if I was using M dashes or like long dashes. Yeah, I fought with the software for page size, layout, font, page numbers, margins, line spacing. And of course, you have to do that twice for both paperback and digital. And I think it just took such a long time because I did not know what I was doing. Yeah, so that's how to self-pub. If anyone doesn't want advice, I can now give it to you, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I did it right or the best way, but I tried my best, I guess. Okay, advice for my younger self as a writer. Yeah, I think again it's just to have patience because I did not at the start of this. In fact, in general, because I think I sent out my first query letter to an agent at like age 18, 21, something ridiculous, and it was not even really what I would consider a novel that I was pitching. It's terrible. Yeah, I wish I had learned patience. I don't know. I feel like in our 20s, I think it's our generation. We feel like you have to do everything at a young age. Yeah, put an undue amount of stress on myself. It was pointless, and it didn't get me anywhere. Now I'm very happy that I am 30 years old. That book is out. Yeah, I think it happened how it was meant to happen. But back then, of course, I did not see it. And would I do it again? Yeah, absolutely. And I would do it as I've done it. I obviously have always wanted the traditional publishing route, but having gone down that route and seen how brutal it was, because when editors rejected you, it wasn't because the writing was bad, it was because like it didn't fit within their marketing campaign. They were promoting a book that was already like that because like so many insignificant like reasons. It was just to do with their company or like that particular editor. In fact, there's a really fun story. Should I tell you this? So when I think I mentioned there were about 3 editors that were interested, unbeknownst to me and unbeknownst to my agent when she approached them, 2 of them were in a relationship. So she had to be so careful. My agent had to be so careful when she was approaching one to wait until they definitely said no before approaching the second one. Because whereas normally you would probably try to negotiate with like everyone at the same time, trying to like rile them up. Don't want to do that if they are in a relationship. So yeah, it was all just it was very self-pub is trying, it's difficult, but so was the publishing industry. I yeah, I don't know. I used to, as say, be set on one, but now I've been through both. I'm like, you know what? At least this is on my own terms. I think it definitely helped for my first novel to get it up to that the publishing standard, to go through that process. But now I don't know what that standard is. I think I'm perfectly okay to leave it behind, really. Okay, I'm gonna do it again. Are you going to self-pub again with the next book? Probably is the answer. Probably, and hopefully it'll be a lot smoother this time because I know what I'm doing. I hope. Okay, more questions. We have how long do we have? Quarter an hour. I can do more questions, or I can do another reading. Anyone has opinions? Another reading? All right. Let's see what we have. You know what? We'll skip Rune's intro. It's not fun. I want you guys to know when Ed and Rebecca meet. That's a lot more fun. So Ed, who's the he's the protagonist of the second story. This is his point of view. He meets Rebecca, who was the protagonist of the first. And this happens because Ed is cajoled into a date. He really does not want to be there, as you're about to find out. Holy Zeus, his first date since Simon, and he gets stood up. It's so bloody typical he can't even find it within himself to be angry. Perhaps his date saw him and fled, saw his lifeless greying hair, his thick lens glasses, and divorce written across his face, and ran for the hills. You wouldn't blame them. He digs into his trouser pocket and pulls out his Nokia, just in time to avoid another pitying glance of a passing waiter. He's still not used to having a mobile phone, but if it serves any purpose, it's in calling his colleague to tell him that the wonderful woman he promised didn't even have the gall to show up. In retrospect, it was extraordinarily stupid to agree to this in any case without asking for details first. All Chris disclosed is that they'd have lots in common, but Ed doesn't know if that means another divorcee or just a fellow employee of a pair bond service. Doesn't even know what she looks like, for God's sake. All Chris gave him was the name. Rebecca, Rebecca Brighton. Ed strains his neck as he turns to find the source of the words and sees a small, meek woman standing behind the board with the métier in a long, unremarkable brown dress. I'm here to meet, but she trails off when her eyes meet his, and her eyes grow wide, the very picture of a deer in the headlights. Ed swallows his nerves. Is it possible that this woman wants to be here even less than he does? More to the point, how is that possible, given that he was practically strong-armed here? Then he follows Rebecca's panicked look to the window behind her and sees an ever-enthusiastic Chris Thompson giving her a thumbs up. Ed swears under his breath. By the looks of it, his date was very literally strong-armed here. Ed narrows his eyes when he sees someone in the shadow behind Chris, a preteen girl from the looks of it. Mousy hair, chunky jumper, a petulant look on her face, though her curious eyes are squinting through the window looking straight at him. Ed looks away, uncomfortable under such scrutiny. He didn't think that Chris's kids were that old yet, but Ed's been so antisocial these last few years, it's entirely possible he's mistaken. Unless the child was Rebecca's. He narrows his eyes to get a closer look, but Chris and the child disappear from sight before he can start speculating. In their stead, his date approaches, led by the métier. As she gets closer, Ed sees that his first assessment of her had been correct. She looks terrified, visibly shaking as she grips the chair to pull it out. Ed remembers his manners and stands up with his hand outstretched in recognition, but he falters midway when he notices a thick black band around her wrist. No recognition then. She's clearly not interested in greeting him at all as she busies herself with sitting down, and Ed, feeling embarrassed and at least 3 types of awkward, withdraws his hand and sits back down to find that Rebecca has already hidden herself behind the menu without so much as an apology for her tardiness. He puffs out a breath, wondering how on earth this date managed to get worse when it was already at dire. Despite his best efforts, his eyes fall to her wrist again. Why is she wearing a black bracelet? The possibilities race through Ed's mind. Is she a dedicated settler? Is it due to her religion? Is she somehow connected to an outlaw? If she knows Chris, then the latter would make the most sense. But there are 100 reasons why people don't want to be touched for recognition, and he still has enough wits about him to know it's rude to ask. Instead, he looks at what else he can see around the rectangle of the menu that hides her face. Her plain dress looks homemade now that he's closer, made out of some sort of simple material, and her dishwater hair is tied up in a messy bun. But he's in no position to judge her clothing, given that his shirt hasn't seen an iron since Simon was here. He shakes his head to dispel the thought of Simon before he can take hold. She couldn't be more different than him in looks alone. A woman, for starters, white as a crumpled Kleenex in long tangled hair, whereas Simon would never let his thick hair grow longer than half an inch before going to Billy's for a trim. They couldn't be more different, he assures himself. So, Ed starts, buckling onto the unbearable silence. How do you know Chris? This safe bit of small talk seems to have the opposite effect than what he had intended. She practically jumps at being spoken to, and then turns rigid like a statue. Nothing but complete silence behind the menu barrier. Ed decides to persevere. I know Chris from PBS, he says. The pair bond service? Still no response. Ed wraps his fingertips against the tablecloth, risking another glance towards his companion before trying again. I'm the primary tester there. It's my job to officiate new bonds, collect research, monitor unusual cases sometimes. It's mostly just sitting behind a computer, pressing buttons, and paperwork. A lot of paperwork. But I like it. What do you do? Nothing, apparently, if her continued silence is anything to go by. He stares. She stays silent. He has no idea what to do. He has no idea how he even ended up on a date, given that he's no intention for this to actually progress anywhere. What's the point in dating if he doesn't want to marry? What's the point in any of it? It's a favor, he reminds himself. It's just a favor for a colleague. All he has to do is get through it. Okay, Ed says decisively, plan having formed in his mind. He reaches over and tugs the menu out of her hands. She makes a little squeak in surprise as her pale face appears before him. Neither of us want to be here, he surmises. So how's this for a deal? We get starters and a drink, enough to convince our mutual friend that we both successfully navigated a social engagement without disaster, and then we leave. 30 minutes tops. We don't even have to speak to each other. For a moment longer, she is silent, and he begins to fear that he has overstepped or assumed too much, but now he can see her hazel eyes. He's not so sure. It just looks like she's processing, and that's fine too. He thinks she might also be younger than he thought at first glance, mid-30s at most. Okay, she says. Mediterranean salad, appetizer. Ed breathes a sigh of relief. Okay, good. And that really sets up their dynamic, I suppose. The next time you see her, actually, it's her shouting at him. It's extremely fun. Yeah, they're just coming from the same place, but also somehow very different places. Yeah, that's really fun to write. Does Rebecca still work at this point? Yeah, it's try to find a way to mention it. She does. So in fact, I think it is briefly mentioned. She works as like a home carer at this point. So in Rebecca's section at the start, she's a nurse at a big hospital. When she loses Matthew, and she sort of retreats into herself, she becomes a home carer. And then by the time you meet her in Lizzie's section, I can't remember if she's working or not. If she is, it's still as a carer. How changed she is compared to. Yeah, Chris is a good character. Good call. What is the future for all the characters? I think the big question, one of the big questions, I suppose, is do any of these relationships last? Like, I built them up, but I don't think I can really answer for you guys if you want them to continue or not. Lizzie and Rose obviously do because they're bonded, but what that ends up looking like, I mean, it's a shame again that we don't have the full section because you see what it ends up looking like. And honestly, it's brilliant, and hopefully would have resolved your concerns regarding that. But Ed and Rebecca, I like to think they're solid. But do you guys think Ed ever bonds? Like, he goes off and searches, but do you think he ever does? I mean, it's up to you to interpret that. Okay, I think we've got another question here. Some other bits I really like. Oh, Lizzie's panic attacks, yeah. And when Ed goes to her school and everyone at work. Yeah. One of my favorite things about Ed is, because he's stuck in this pit of depression, his routine never changes. And so the really funny thing to write was when he does two things. He leaves, he has a long lunch hour at one point to when he first actually has proper talk with Rebecca. He has a longer lunch hour and he comes back and everyone's like, "You've never even missed lunch at the cafeteria. You didn't go outside. What is this?" And then the second one where when he leaves for Lizzie, I won't tell you exactly why, but when he leaves, he comes back and just pretty much the entire office is there waiting for him, expecting an explanation for this unusual behavior. I love it. I think it's just something that happens when you have depression, is you just go through the motions, and this guy's been doing it for 5 years. Like, he's going to be the most predictable person on the planet. And it was kind of nice to interrupt that routine for him. Can any bond in pairs? Okay. Short answer is, I suppose both pairs could agree to commit suicide, but because basically you feel their pain, hopefully before it even gets to that stage, you would sort of understand why they're feeling that way and work it out. I think that's the sort of appeal of a bond in that way, is that you can wordlessly communicate with your partner things that you maybe would not normally be able to say. So hopefully, if you were feeling sort of trapped, I just realized you read an earlier version of the novel, Tin and Tonic. I'm so sorry. I may have made the ending a little nicer for you, because I just realized I also realized that without the full section, you don't sort of know how they're working that out. So I added in a line in the very end, where essentially Lizzie's thinking about their bond, and they. I'm sorry, she's spending the whole live stream mad at me, but I put it in where she thinks essentially the way that the bond works is that she's too afraid of sort of feeling trapped in a way, which totally makes sense, and that they sort of he understands that, and that's why, unlike the pairs that she's seen in Ruin's mind and those that exist, the ones that are like this, they have a much more this relationship. They like being close. They have to be close to each other in order to like stay sane, but because of their personalities, because of the way they are, they've sort of have negotiated this this way to be. That yeah. Otherwise, I think it wouldn't suit them. You know, they would be miserable. Okay, so we have like 5 minutes left. Someone have any last minute questions? Would you have a little think? There are many questions we did not address. Am I on socials, etc.? Yes. Yes, I am. Okay. So while you guys are thinking of last minute questions, I can let you know you can follow me on Twitter at Casey Bourne. I've got a website. It's just caseybourne.co.uk. Really inventive, I know. So you can find me on those places if you do think of any more questions that you want. Book, if you haven't already bought the book Pair Bonding, you can buy on Amazon. Just search Pair Bonding Casey Bourne. It'll appear like magic. So it's currently $1.99 for digital. I will warn you though that Amazon have put back books on like a low priority delivery thing. So most books are not being delivered until like April. And because mine is a self, they've got to print it too. It's I think early May. Sorry, coronavirus. Is what it is. So you can get the digital version like immediately, but if you order a paperback, it's gonna take a while to arrive. So yes, that's it. Thank you so much, Molly. Cool. Oh, you got your copy today. Good. I'm glad it arrived before the cutoff. So I think they decided they only pushed back the book orders like a week or so ago. So if you got it in before then, you're A-okay. We do some live events post-corona if there's interest for it, but I don't know, guys. Do you want me to? You ordered that Wicked. Okay, yeah, there you go. Lou, you're probably the last people to get it. Well done. Cool. Yeah, cool. Right, I think that's everything, guys. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for supporting me in the book. And thank you also if you have bought the book. Yeah, if you haven't, again, the reminder is it's called Pair Bonding. It's by Casey Bourne. You can find me on Amazon. And you can follow me on Twitter at Casey Bourne. And my website, caseybourne.co.uk. I think that's everything. Thank you so much, guys.